Hello, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube, and welcome to a very special retrospective. I am Dead Ponic, and with me is the King of Citrus Fruit, King Orange.
Greetings, exalted ones.
So, for this very special retrospective, we are going to be covering the original Battlefront 2 on that was on the original Xbox, the PS2, and PC. It is available through the Classic Collection. However, we will not be covering that. We are specifically focusing on the original campaign, not the multiplayer aspect. Just a quick side note, if you do want to play the Classic Collection, get the console version. Do not get the PC version. Anyway, so what is this game about exactly?
So Battlefront 2 essentially came out back in 2005, 1 year after the release of the original Battlefront that came out in 2004. Great memories, by the way. And pretty much in all but name, essentially operated as a tie-in towards Revenge of the Sith. And pretty much most of its content was centered around that movie. Pretty much most of the new maps were centered around Revenge of the Sith. And the big selling point of the game outside of the new maps and the expanded features was you could play as heroes and you had space combat, which put those two together and you got a game that, for better and for worse, is a lot more bigger and ambitious than the game before it.
And one
So
and one thing to note here is that for all the heroes are mostly from the prequel and original trilogy, except for two. In the Xbox version of the game, um, the original Xbox game that you can get on the Microsoft Store, the two bonus DLC characters are Ventress and Kit Fisto, and you also get the two. I believe you get three. No, it's four classic. How many classic?
yeah, they had Bespin back in, both of the Renvar maps, and Yavin
Then four.
Arena.
Yeah, and
I
I think
think I'm pretty sure those are the ones.
yeah, those are the ones, and those are included on the classic collection. They are also available on the Xbox version of the game that you can get on the Microsoft Store. So, pertaining to the overall background of the game itself, this is basically putting you on boots on the ground in the middle of a battlefield, essentially. It is kind of like the Star Wars version of the Battlefield games, a little bit. It focuses as a first and third person shooter with a class system where when you capture objectives, you get points and you can unlock various characters or various specialty units. Each faction of the classic four factions has two units that only they have, and you get points in order to unlock and play as them. And also, you have a a reinforcement counter at the top, which tells you how many times you can respawn before you get defeated.
Well, and how many times your allies can do the same. It's pretty much like grinding the troops down, and the more command posts you have, the more it drains the enemy reinforcements. So it kind of works out like that. But contrary to the first game, so by comparison with context between the first and the second game, the first game's campaign in the grand scheme of things wasn't really a campaign. It was very much just having regular conquest matches told in a very specific order that was meant to kind of loosely reflect the movies, while this is a much more dedicated, like, original story. And ironically, its big selling point where every other game was essentially focused on Jedi adventures and everything else, this one or like special forces, here you're just a regular boots on the ground clone trooper. And
And
that's pretty much the entire campaign is focused on the perspective of you as that clone trooper, which is told through essentially a 501st Journal narration that is voice acted by Tamara Morrison.
And one thing that I really enjoy about this is that he has various ranges in which he like describes certain things, and I also enjoy like just the opening cutscenes of each mission and also the closing cutscenes. It really reflects that whole idea that you are playing as a clone trooper, even though you can play as the heroes. Granted, when you play as the heroes, you're only playing for a limited time, but at the same time, when you're playing as the clone troopers, every death is significant because you are playing as that clone trooper. So Now let's get into the campaign. So the campaign actually technically starts with the tutorial, which teaches you all about the various objectives, how to fire your weapon, how to use your secondary weapon, and vehicles and all the various classes. And the hero for this mission is Mace Windu, and probably the best opening of any campaign that I've seen. My first day as a member of the 501st, it was hot, sandy, chaotic. Not at all like the simulations on Camino. I guess that's all what we prepared for, wasn't it? All that breeding, all those years of training. It doesn't really prepare you for all the screaming and all the blood, does it? Frankly, I'm surprised we made it through the first hour. Never mind the first day.
Kind of the irony of the statement, though, is actually you could almost say that line of all the screaming and the blood, specifically the blood, like normally people would associate it as a plot hole. Like, wait, isn't Blaster supposed to cauterize the room? But then you realize they're not just getting shot by battle droids, they're also getting shot by Geonosians that don't use traditional blasters. They use the like radiation cannons,
Yeah,
and
the
those
sonic
things
the
are
sonic cannons.
yeah, the sonic cannons, and those things are if you get into the EU and like if you get into EU descriptions of those, they are nasty. They
Mm.
are nasty weapons. But beginning with the opening level, it doesn't have a lot to talk about mainly because it is just kind of pacing itself as a opening level and just kind of teaching you the basic roadmap. But it does a very good job at giving every major gameplay mechanic a chance to shine between you playing as your standard clone trooper, switching over to the different classes, especially your standard ones between the heavy trooper, the sniper, and the engineer. But then on top of that, it then caps it off with playing as Mace Windu. So, and it teaches you the ropes on capturing the command posts and all of that. So it does a very good job in a very short period of time of basically telling you exactly what you need to do
And
and what the rest of the game is going to be like.
and if there's anything synonymous with this game, watch those wrist rockets.
Oh dear God.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, another key difference between the Battlefront 2 campaign versus Battlefront 1, which you can already tell through the opening level, is it's not a traditional conquest game. Its campaign is very structured with very specific set of objectives. And some of those objectives are very unique to the campaign itself. Like you're not going to see it in instant action or galactic conquest or anything like that. So in that way, the campaign's already kind of set itself apart by essentially offering a unique experience that you're not going to get through the rest of the game. So,
And it's a very like they also have the training bit that you can go through. It's basically just a movie. It just like does it through basically one big giant cutscene, which teaches you your basics of space combat, which you'll need for many of the later levels. So uh since Orange is very wanted to talk about this himself, uh we actually discussed this in private, but he wanted to talk about the difference between how the clones are portrayed in this game and in the EU versus how they're portrayed in TCW. Orange, would you like to elaborate?
yeah, sure. So it's especially noticeable once when you get to the Megiddo opening cutscene, but like a big contrast that you notice straight away, and it's kind of unique to talk about because even though kids that grew up in the 90s to early 2000s had that exposure of that old set of clones, most Star Wars fans nowadays are mainly know the Clone Troopers through Star Wars: The Clone Wars or TCW for short. And they are portrayed very differently in the show versus how they are in the films. And the EU leans much more closer to kind of how they are in the movies. They're very, unlike TCW, where they're very warm and very humanized and individualized, the EU and by extension this game very much treats the clones like how they are in the movies. Very cold, calculating, straight to the point, mission first. The mantra, good soldiers follow orders, that kind of mindset. But a compliment I will immediately give this game because kind of, I have my own opinion, thoughts about the contrast between how the clones are portrayed in TCW versus how they were originally, especially within the mechanics of Order 66. But I think both work in their own way. It's just kind of a shame that like, one pretty much automatically comes at the expense of the other. But I think they both work in their own way. But immediately what I like about how Battlefront 2 portrays their clones is they really follow that cold, calculating, ruthless conduct of following orders, but they're still able to humanize the clones through that narrator and essentially have it that even though they are like extremely committed to their job, essentially of being Palpatine's personal hit squad when you really think about it, um, they still have their own individual thoughts about what they're dealing with and how they want to go about it. And that really shows itself as the game continues. So I think it's a case of an argument I'll make is just because the old EU wanted to write the clones more straight to the point and following orders and all that, doesn't mean you can't tell interesting stories with that. And I think Battlefront 2 is like perfect proof of that.
So, the very first actual official level, one thing to note here is that the game uses clips from from mainly, uh,
They do like movie clips to kind of set the setting, and then they actually have the clone narrative fill with like in-game cutscenes where they're essentially just taking gameplay. They're taking gameplay, recording it in third person, and essentially just using that as the crux.
yeah, and one thing to note, you are playing as a member of the 501st, which is an interesting thing where basically the 501st in TCW
Blue
is
stripes. Blue stripes.
yeah, it's a lot of fun, and they're basically um pushing the idea that that the 501st is not specifically just one. It's not like a battalion or a division of clones that does everything. It teams up with other divisions, but it's also Palpatine's personal hit squad, and the first mission on
Which is
Megiddo.
already such a big contrast from the show.
Yeah,
Because the show, the 501st is like among one of the most friendly clone units out there, if you could really equate it. While in the game, it's very much like, no, screw everyone.
mhm,
Palpatine wants us to do this. We're gonna do this. Like
yeah,
it's
and
such a weird like tonal whiplash for anyone. Like imagine the idea of like because there's probably some audience members that are like this, where it's like they've probably seen the show first and then they're gonna play the game and be like, what the actual hell? Why are these guys like evil, man? Like why are they so ruthless?
yeah, exactly. And
But
so the first mission is on Megiddo, which is briefly seen in the movie, and your mission is basically to take out a big giant energy collector that houses something for a big round sphere.
what
Basically,
Peyote Mummy did not know, however, was that the energy collector contained an energy crystal that the Chancellor wanted for a
for a
super
super
laser.
laser.
Keeping Mundy in the dark wasn't easy. The Jedi had become increasingly suspicious of the Chancellor's dealings, and we're on the lookout for even the slightest hint of treachery. Of course, just like the others, he never really caught wind of what was going on until it was far too late.
By and far, like when you start the mission, you'll usually have like a clone commander basically giving you the rundown. You'll usually start by capturing a command post. My favorite quote from just the in-game is, "Let's turn this place into a scrap pile." And just my favorite thing to do is like take the ATRT and just go across the bridge and wreck shit. So
And right at the beginning, you're already establishing like just how the tone has shifted. Because even though Geonosis is a very like it already establishes the tonal what look like essentially the whiplash the clones feel from their training to the battle, the ending cutscene still establishes the clones' optimistic outlook of the war. Like, incredibly, we managed to survive the Crucible on Geonosis, and we now feel ready for whatever the war will throw at us. 3 years later, they are not in a great place.
no,
And
not at all.
essentially the entire like conflict now is very rooted where you have it on Megiddo of all places where it's dark, it's dreary, it's clouds and gray everywhere. And it's very appropriate to really symbolize just how bleak the war has gotten by this point.
And s-
So
and so you take up the first objective is to take the command post, then you clear out the anti-air guns, and so you get your first hero, which is ironically Kiani Mundi. So and basically you're trying to basically just push to the energy collector, take it out, collect the power source, and bring it back to the gunship, which is waiting at your original spawn point. And the ending cutscene really highlights that the clones at this point, at least particularly the Galactic Marines, I think, and also a little bit of the 501st, they basically said the success of Megiddo was something of a revelation for the men of the 501st. Suddenly, we realized that the Jedi could be fooled, and if they could be fooled, they could be killed. And it has this scene where like the clone sniper's like moving his sniper rifle. It's very haunting.
engineer.
Oh,
Sorry,
engineer.
I'm a nitpicker. Engineer.
Oh, okay, sorry. I thought it was a
Yeah, no,
sniper.
no, you're good, man. It's good. But I will say this, and it's a small nitpick on the Megiddo level, is I do believe you do kind of run into a gameplay versus story conflict where it's like if you keep Kiadi Mundi alive the whole time, it still has that objective of, oh, take the energy collector to the gunship or take the crystal to the gunship. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Kiadi Mundi's not supposed to know about this. Why is he being told to take it there? What? Like it's kind of funny and, it's just one of those funny like, gameplay gets in the way sometimes, but that's okay.
So the
It's
so the next.
oh, I do have one more thing.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, if I can. Um, I also will say through the ending cutscene of Megiddo, it does another contrast with TCW with that is really just showing that the clones in this game can be quite devious, which is such a contrast between how honor bound they are in the show. Like I'm gonna make a lot of comparisons with that, but I think it's appropriate just because it's just so interesting seeing these two completely different portrayals of this fighting force. And they're both like in a way almost equally compelling in that sense.
Yeah, that's fair. So the next mission is actually the very first space mission. Now the
Coruscant.
oh god, we are literally in the middle of the Battle of Coruscant
This is where the
essentially.
fun begins.
Oh god. So basically, the one thing I will say that has not aged very well, and I will compliment the new BF2 on, is that the space combat in BF2 is actually a lot better than the space combat in the original game. The problem is that this is not really designed for like a controller or even for a keyboard and mouse, but and it's very basic stuff. But the idea is basically you are taking out um support ships in order to fly into what is supposed to be the I believe it is the
Invisible
invisible.
hand.
I believe it is the invisible hand. I could be mistaken here, but
It's supposed to be, yeah. Like obviously you have to take liberties because it's like, well, it is a 2005 video game, so it's not going to be able to process a fully rendered chip, but they at least like make it, it is a separatist
Providence class.
yeah, it is a Providence class dreadnought. So it's kind of like you can suspend your disbelief and say, okay, yeah, sure, it's the invisible hand. Let's go
So,
with it.
so one nitpick I do have now, you do start off with just the ARC 170, but as the missions go through up until the end of the Republic campaign, the bomber class is a V-wing, not a Y-wing. Now, I don't know.
Which is such a weird thing because the V-wing is actually technically an interceptor, but they
Yeah,
made it a bomber. I kind of it's the same thing we talked about this in private, but it's like it's clear that a lot of ship models were kind of used because they didn't have, at least in the context of the prequel trilogy, they didn't have a lot of ship models at the time to really work with that. Though it is still puzzling they would use the V-wing. It is just I would have almost thought like if you're gonna use a bomber, I would have almost gone with the V-19.
I was gonna say because the rebels used the Y-wing, they didn't want to reuse that, and
Which is,
considering
well, yeah, and at the time it wasn't established that the Y-wing was being used by the Republic. Like, it was hinted on, but it was never really outright confirmed
yeah,
at the
so
time.
So yeah,
We
so
just knew that the only thing we knew about the Y-Wing up until that point was that it was just a Clone Wars era bomber that the Rebels later reutilized, but we never really knew which side was using it. Though you could almost, once when we did understand what the Clone Wars was, you could probably just by default think it was the Republic because, well, all the bombers on the Separatist side would be droids.
yeah,
So,
yeah, pretty much. So and then the ending cutscene is, uh, after we successfully created an opening, General Kenobi and General Skywalker used the opportunity we created to land into the hangar and rescue the Chancellor. Took all the credit too, which really shows how actually vain a clone can actually be because they are the
prideful.
yeah,
Damn
they're
those pesky Jedi taking all the credit. We're the ones doing all the work here.
yeah, they're the fighting men of the 501st, generally speaking. Now, the 501st does say like the clone that narrates says like it would be the first time that we actually got our wings through the cockpit of a 170. I love the 170. So, you could kind of describe the 170 as kind of like the F-16 or the F-14 of the Star Wars universe, and even that's a stretch because you could argue it's also an F-18. But yeah,
I will also say I like how the opening cutscene does put a highlight on how, because of how strained the Republic war effort has gotten, they are literally effectively forcing what were originally trained just to be frontline infantrymen into essentially, hey, we need you to know some piloting skills so that way if we don't have enough pilots to take control of these ships, you can do it. Like it's it's one of those situations where it's nice having that because it's basically the case of if you look at the broader sense of the war, even in the context of the, it's clear that the separatists were always going to have the numerical advantage, even if you don't yet know how astronomically that is. Because even the movies at least showcase, hey, a clone takes 10 years to grow. Meanwhile, the separatists can produce a battle droid in a matter of an hour, like a few hours.
give or
And so
take.
you already have that big difference. So it's kind of nice to see how while the separatists just keep throwing droids over and over and over again, the Republic's way of trying to counter that is, okay, let's make our troops as versatile as possible. So that way it's like, okay, yeah, we may not have like as many numbers, but our troops can adapt to practically anything.
Oh,
So
one other nitpick that I forgot to mention: the CIS bomber is actually the same model as General Grievous's fighter. So don't know what's
which
up.
one is that called again?
It's I don't know what the actual model is called,
Give me a second with that. Um,
Grievous's ship was actually named Soulless One. But for some reason, I guess because it's a tie into the movie, they wanted to kind of you get that ship model out there. I don't actually know. Oh, they could have used Hyena bombers. That's probably what it was. But
yeah, Hyena bombers got introduced in TW. Personal starfighter, yada yada. Doesn't really say what type it is. Class 2 modified. Soulless One product information. It's a Belbulib 22 starfighter.
oh, okay. So
So
yeah.
yeah, so it was created by Phaethon Ultra Scalpel Assemblies. So
Hmm.
must be one of the smaller companies, but it's yeah, you're probably right. It's kind of the same reason why the V-Wing gets in. It's just it's a recognizable ship from like it's a recognizable fighter from the movie. And it's kind of a case that even though there are other EU ships you could theoretically use, it was probably just easier for them to go, hey, this one's going to be in the movie. Let's make that our bomber.
Funny
Because why not?
funny enough, the V-Wing actually was one of the design inspirations for creating the TIE Fighter. In fact, in the movie, during the one of the last scenes, when the V-Wings fly by, you can actually hear the TIE Fighter roar, which is
I mean, it's
strange.
practically a proto TIE fighter when you kind of think about it.
Yeah.
But
So now we come to Felucia. Oh god, the space Vietnam mission. Oh god. Okay. It's been said that the 501st got the best of the war. We also got the worst. On Felucia, the Seps dug their metal heels into the muck of that alien hellhole and dared the Republic to come after us. And so we did, only to be greeted by the uh, what was it?
flesh-eating
Diseases,
diseases,
shrieking nocturnal predators, and other sights that
horror sites that
haunt
haunt me
me
to
to
this
this
day.
day are only cut up, cut off and all for an all for we know, abandoned by our leadership. Our only hope was Ayla Sakura, our Jedi commander. Without without her iron will, none of us would have made it out of that hellhole with our
None of us would have gone off that rock with our
the
sanities
intent.
or our lives. When her death came, I hoped it was quick. She earned that much. Yeah, you're already getting the tone. And I will say this. Normally these cutscenes, sometimes they can build up and you think, oh, it can't be that good. It is that good.
Oh, God. Where are they?
And right
Oh no,
away,
they're all
right
dead.
away, right away, you already get a very different contrast from Megiddo because you're already coming in and it's not bombastic. It's just quiet. And you hear and you all you hear is clones like freaking panicking and screaming through the comms. And you go to the ATTE walker and no one's there. And you're like, are they like setting this up? Like, is this a horror setup? And practically they meet it with there where you're immediately where after you succeed in that objective, you have to hold that area for a bit and you are greeted not by battle droids, but by the accolades. By the
Egg.
accolades.
So one
Yeah.
thing so one thing about this is that Aclays are actually not native to Geonosis or Felucia. They are native to someplace else. But these things,
But the Commerce Guild decided, let's bring them here because why not?
yeah, and they are tough. They will rip through your lines and you start off with
Play
very
as the sharpshooter. Play as the sharpshooter.
engineer. Shotgun's better. But anyway, um, you start with very limited reinforcement points, and it's very contrasting to Megiddo. And also, you are in space Vietnam, and in space, no one can hear you scream.
I understood that reference.
Uh,
But
oh, zip it, Captain
yeah,
America.
essentially, you have to defend the objective from the accolades and eliminate a certain amount. I think it was like 5 of them,
6.
I think. 6, thank you. And then after that, you have to defend the objective where as soon as you clear the accolades out, you then are greeted by, they say, oh, a separatist platoon is on their way to greet you. And so you have to hold the ATTE, you have to keep it locked down for like 3 or
3
so
minutes.
minutes.
3 minutes.
Yeah, 3 minutes while the clone engineers are trying to get it fixed up. So essentially you are now in a high stress situation of like, oh shoot, the droids are coming in from all sides. And then you get to the third objective, which is essentially you get to pilot the ATTE. Well, actually, there's one in between. You have to take a control monitor to the ATTE,
Yep. Power source.
and then yeah, a power source, and then after that, you then take the ATTE and you have to destroy a bunch of separatist, essentially anti-air guns. And during that, you can finally play as Ayla Sakura. However, this objective is also extremely tough because you're essentially having to deal with both battle droids and accolades at the same time.
Well, for me, I just rush in there and wreck shit because Aayla Secura is the only character in this game that has 2 lightsabers, despite the fact that in actual EU she only wielded 1. And also, lightsaber throw is the most overpowered ability in this game. Like, just saying that right now. And also, her moveset is very unique and different from the other characters that you play as, except for the ones that are not wielding lightsabers. But the thing is that I really like is that you could just blaze right through, and it's very easy to take out the anti-aircraft guns because most of the time the AI is actually focused on the ATT. So you playing as the hero, you could just blitz
The
right
only
through.
group you really have to worry about is the accolades
Oh
themselves,
yeah.
because the problem is if you get in close range with them, they'll screw you up. Even if you're Ayla Sakura, like if you get in close range with it, it only takes like 2 hits to kill you.
Also,
So
your health bar is on a time limit technically when you play as the hero.
yeah, every hero is like that.
So you are not invincible, and also getting kills actually increases your timer, and you can basically, if you start killing like wrecking shit, you will basically be able to play it for unlimited amount of time. This is mostly what happens in most multiplayer games during this period when the game came out. For me, though, I think the ending cutscene really shows the attitude that the clones were starting to show towards the Jedi, which is it's when we were finally rotated out of Felucia, Aayla Secura made a point of personally seeing us off, calling us the bravest soldiers she had ever seen. It's t- it's a shame. It's a good thing we were
It was
wearing.
a good thing we were all wearing helmets because none of us could bear to look her in the eye.
Yeah,
And it
it's
demonstrates like a double economy because you almost have two meanings from that because it's a case of saying, is it, because you can almost take away two meanings from it. Is it a case that the clones just, is it a case that the clones can't bear to look at her because of, ooh, she's a Jedi and that's like just no go? Or is it a case where, which seems to be the more accurate answer is, the clones can't, the 501st can't look her in the eye because they have some degree of an understanding on what they're going to be doing later on. They have an understanding where it's like at some point a conflict between the clones and the Jedi are going to break out.
yeah.
And as soon as that happens, it's kind of like, look, we don't want to get too attached to you because we might have to kill you later. So,
It's funny. It's funny because Aayla Secura's death is probably the most. It's not the most graphic, but it is the most like overtly like excessive because the clones when they kill her in the movie they just keep firing, like there's no like sense that they're stopping. I mean it could be just like they wanted to give her a merciful death kind of thing, but the
make it
excessive.
as quick and painless as possible,
Yeah, pretty much.
essentially. Which in that sense, the 501st narrator got his wish.
Yeah,
I
but
hope it was quick. She earned that much, and she did ironically get like, in a sense, she got a very quick death because it's kind of like, well, if they keep firing on her, she's going to be too dead before she even registers what the hell is happening.
unlike Kiadi Mundi who got gunned down in front of his troops facing them, and
Yeah, and it's like, whoa, what the?
yeah, and actually, I believe the Galactic Marines were actually happy to kill Mundi because I learned something from the EU was that Mundi was kind of sadistic when it came to fighting, and especially in TCW.
I wouldn't say he's sadistic. Very, he's very detached and borderline callous. He's not. The problem with Mundy is he just doesn't really connect with anyone, which in fairness, most Jedi have that problem, but especially true with him where it's kind of like, sir, we just lost a bunch of troops. Oh,
Yeah,
okay, that's another Tuesday. Moving on. Like, dude,
I mean,
like
I mean,
your
granted,
troops are not gonna like you.
granted, TCW does do this a little bit, and especially the bring in the flamethrowers.
Ah, the Geneva checklist.
All right, so next mission is another space mission. It is the Space Kashyyyk mission, which basically it's explained that in order to break through to the planet below, because this is referenced in the movie.
What about the droid attack on the Wookiees?
Yep. And basically, you're basically trying to take out the orbital defenses. And my god, those Munilus class defense ships are just borderline annoying because I don't think people fully realize that in those days when you were playing space combat, those Munilus class ships or those support ships generally, they could shoot you. They're probably the cause of most of the deaths in the space combat because anti-aircraft guns.
I practically make it my first order of business to take them out personally, but it's yeah, the escort defense is good, really top notch, and then you're given more objectives related to inside the ship where you have to land a LAT gunship in there. And let me forewarn you, the game, I don't know if they just didn't program it properly, but it's like you have to land it just on the
Perfectly.
precise like arrow
Yeah.
spot that they want you at. And if you're so much as a millimeter off, it won't register that you've done it. So like you could literally land in the hangar and it'll say, go
Yep.
land in the hangar. I'm like, I'm already in the hangar.
Hanger. Exactly. Oh,
It's
and
like, no, we want you to land in this precise spot.
yeah.
But
And
why?
and the opening cutscene is also pretty dark because the clone narrator says the only way we're getting off this planet is in a body bag, and it shows a clone pilot falling through space, which indicates that his ship either got blown up and he was unfortunate enough to actually survive the initial explosion, or he got chucked down an airlock for some reason. Who knows?
You know,
But
I'm willing to bet headcanon.
hmm,
Headcanon, I'm willing to bet that clone died from asteroids. I'm betting it.
hmm.
I'm headcanon. I mean, obviously, buzz droids aren't featured in the game. Thank God.
Oh god.
But they are featured in the Revenge of the Sith video game. But that's beside the point.
And then we come to Ground Kashyyyk, as we call it, and this is pretty much we're reenacting the Battle of Kashyyyk from what we saw in the movie for the most part, except it's more expanded. And welcome to basically the Star Wars version of the landing of Normandy, because you literally have to hold this command post for what is it, 2 minutes?
Well, it's practically like D-Day, Star Wars Edition, except ironically, in this scenario, you're
Playing
pretty
as
much
the
the Germans.
defenders. You're playing as
So
the
you're pretty much
defenders.
the Germans in this whole thing. So like, you know, what real settle guys, like,
I mean,
I mean it works. It works when you think about, hey, the Republic literally only has like a day or two left before it's about to become a fascist dictatorship. So,
even in the ending cutscene, they say we came as heroes and we returned years later as conquerors. Probably the one thing that makes
you
this
gotta imagine how awkward that was. Like, oh, clone trooper, oh, clones, thank you. You saved us from the droids. We're free now. Oh, I wouldn't say free,
very.
more like under new management.
And
It's
also
great.
the clone narrator makes a comment about how talking about the Wookiees when none of us counted on was the Wookiees. We'd all heard the stories, but we'd never seen a rip them a, rip a droid with their bare hands. They were magnificent.
Which I like because it actually is a nice contrast from how the space level was. Because in the ending cutscene of the space level, they say, like, as I was preparing to, like, as the battle wrapped to a close, I questioned to myself, why did so many of us have to die for a bunch of walking carpets? Which I'm like, is this insinuating some of the clones are a little xenophobic? But I don't know. But it's a nice contrast because what it shows to me is when the clones just view defending like a helpless civilian who can't do anything, they're like, okay, like I'll do it because I'm ordered to, but like, whatever. But then the minute they actually see that the warriors can fight and are actually ferocious warriors, they're like, I actually respect you now. You're cool. I like you. Like, to me,
Yeah.
it really demonstrates, like, to me, it speaks ironically very Mandalorian, which
Mm,
is ironic because,
ironic.
that's where the clones come from, a Mandalorian bounty hunter. So to me, it comes across almost Mandalorian-like where they respect strength. So it's like if you're a helpless civilian, they don't want to protect you, but it's like, hey, if you're an actual capable fighter, we respect you and even admire you. And it makes it almost sad that years later we're going to come in and conquer your entire planet.
Especially when you consider the context of Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader and also The Force Unleashed, depending on which version we're talking
Yeah,
about.
it was brutal. It was
Yeah.
brutal.
So
But
the other objective is you have to retreat behind the seawall and you're protecting this oil refinery for a couple minutes and
one of
then
the hardest objectives in the entire game.
yeah.
Play as the clone engineer, keep that gate closed. If you don't, you're in for a rough ride.
Oh yeah.
But
And then Master Yoda shows up with reinforcements and you get to play as him. The thing I will
and you
say
have to take back all the command posts that you lost.
yeah,
And
and
that's
yeah.
it builds a nice momentum where it's like you're being pushed back all the way to borderline the breaking point. Like it almost reminds me a little bit thinking about like TCW later, even though this game came out first. It reminds me of the landing at Point Range
Oh god.
where it's kind of like you are being pushed all the way back to the at the point and then suddenly everything just like
Turns around.
some big factor comes in that changes the entire tide of the battle. And you're like, thank God. Like if this had been even a minute longer, I would have died.
Yeah.
So
And the thing about Yoda here is that he's the only character who doesn't have a lightsaber throw, despite the fact that we see it in the movie. And you really gotta know how to use Yoda and his
yeah,
small size.
that's a different class of irony.
Yeah. And it's funny because you really have to know how to use his small size because he has a very small hitbox. And because of his small size, you really got to get up close and personal. And God help you if you run into, say, oh, I don't know, tanks, bigger tanks, and droidicas especially. Oh god, the droidicas in this game are just borderline annoying sometimes.
Which
And
is funny because they're actually more overpowered in the first game. So it's kind of like the second game's Droidicas are actually nerfed, but they're still like extremely powerful. Like I think it's a bit of a trade-off though, because I will credit the second game's Droidicas I believe are faster than the first one,
yeah, they are.
but their shields are a little weaker. Like the first game's shields were like, God have mercy. Like I am pounding you with rockets and you're still not dying.
Yeah, and also
But
another thing that this game does is also has a sprint button because in the original game there was no sprinting. There was only crouch and prone, and you were lucky if you even managed to get anywhere with that damn slow walk.
you know, I'll actually credit though, in a weird thematic way, it actually kind of, even though it's not intentional, I think it actually kind of works from a story perspective because it's the concept of thinking about if you play the Clone Wars campaign in Battlefront 1 and then play Rise of the Empire campaign in Battlefront 2, it's kind of like, well, the first game you're playing as B1 and B2 battle droids at the start. They're not very maneuverable because naturally they're just droids. And then you have the clones in the Phase 1 armor. And if you think about the lore, the Phase 1 armor is very good, highly protective, but by the Kaminoans' own admission, they didn't really design it all that well around human. So it's kind of like, it's very, good at protecting you, but it's also like very clunky and like not very comfortable to wear. And then you get to the Phase 2 where it's like, okay, it's not as durable as it was before, but we've made the armor platings a lot lighter and more fitting for the human anatomy, so it's like the clones can now maneuver a lot better.
Yeah.
So ironically, in a weird way, even though it's like I said, even though I know for certain it probably wasn't their intentions, it kind of works from a story perspective thinking about, hey, you just got this new set of armor, this updated cool set of armor now. Now you can sprint and roll around everywhere when, the previous armor wouldn't let you.
Only to die from a sniper or a rocket or a grenade.
Good Lord. Yes,
Anyway,
but
so the next mission, we already talked about the ending for Kashyyyk, but the next mission is the second to last mission of the Republic campaign, which is
oh
Utapau.
no.
Oh boy, this is gonna be fun. So basically,
Okay,
so
I
they.
need to point this out.
Uh
I
oh.
need to point this out. General Kenobi has gathered a force large
Large enough
enough to
to
capture
capture
3 star systems.
systems.
My ass. My fucking ass. Because right at the start of the level, you have less than 30 troops, and yeah, probably less than that. I think it's like 20 or
20, I
something.
think. I'm pretty sure it's 20.
Yeah, it's like 20 troops, and you have to take the first objective. The droids are already there, already barricaded in, and you're like, if I do not blitz this command post within like the first 2 minutes, game over. Just right then and there.
Yeah.
And it's
And
like, it's the one time I will kind of complain because I sound like an asshole for it, but I don't care. It's like, don't tell me that he's gathered enough forces for 3 star systems, but then the 501st has giddily squat to handle one command post.
I believe this was a joint op where basically it was the 212th baby altogether because it was General Kenobi's
Battalion, yeah.
battalion, and then but the 501st was there as a support battalion. Also, if you ever wanted to recreate the "Hello there" bit, yeah.
You can
So
do it.
yeah,
You can do it.
and my
What was
fucking
it?
god, I fucking hate the fight with Grievous. Like even the Revenge of the Sith video game is a lot better than what this.
Depending on how you approach it, it either is going to be extremely easy or extremely hard. Because you either put him in a position where you can easily off the map and he's just gone, or it's like he's going to be a royal pain in the ass that'll probably kill you as Kenobi, but also kill like probably 2 more clone lives that you play as before you finally get him. And then after that, you have to destroy another set of anti-air guns that's in like the Utapau hangar. Like it's essentially the area where council members were having that meeting. In fact, I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, the desk is there. Like the
I'm
desk
pretty
with,
sure it's there too.
yeah, where
Yeah,
Grievous is like
actually.
meeting with everyone, and he's like saying, "Be thankful, Viceroy, that you have not found yourself in my grip."
Okay. Quick lore dump here. In the novel Labyrinth of Evil, there's a really funny moment that is just sums up um Grievous's relationship with Gunray and his thoughts. Hako, where are you going? Running away only make us look guilty.
We are guilty.
I love that.
Look, none of you understand the context. You'll get the context when, if and when the day comes, we review Labyrinth of Evil, but it's it's very personified clearly, even in the movies, that Grievous and Gunray do not like each other at all.
No.
Um, but still, it's just it is remarkable, and it's kind of neat thinking about it too, as like this is kind of like in a way the final. It's kind of like the climax of the war in a way, because kind of like Grievous in a way is, even though in hindsight we know the separatists are essentially screwed no matter what at this point, it's kind of like, at least from a normal galactic citizen's perspective, like if you were a Republic citizen or even a Jedi or clone trooper, you would kind of look at it and say Grievous is kind of like the CIS's last chance in winning the war. Like Dooku's dead, so the political leadership of the CIS is just
Gone.
gone. But it's like Grievous is kind of like still the head honcho military. And this was at a time where Grievous was, for the most part, treated still as a very competent and serious threat before TCW kind of turned him into a joke.
Yeah,
But
and so the ending cutscene really highlights what comes next, and even the narrator says, "Well, now our morale after the success of Oudpel made the men's morale soar, but that was nothing compared to what the orders we received next, which comes to the final level of the Republic campaign, and the one that is infamous among players who played this game back in the day, Nightfall. Oh God."
what I remember about the rise of the Empire is how quiet it was. During the waning hours of the Clone Wars, the 501st were discreetly transferred back to Coruscant. It was a silent trip. We all knew what was about to happen, what we were about to do. Did we have any doubts? Any private traitorous thoughts? Perhaps, but no one said a word. Not on the flight to Coruscant. Not when Order 66 came down, and not when we went marching into the Jedi Temple. Not a word.
Oh my God. So okay, the first
Best
part of
cutscene in the entire game.
oh it is
Anyone
very
who says otherwise can fight me.
it's a very good cutscene. It's very well narrated, but I will
And
say no.
before getting into the level, I do want to briefly cover like the significance of that cutscene, just because I do like how it adds a lot of human elements to the clones, that not only does it personify guilt for what they're about to undertake, but it also insinuates like, yeah, there are potentially could have considered, hey, maybe this isn't the right thing for us to do. But, their whole concept is, well, it's not our job to determine whether it's right or wrong. Our job is, like, your soldiers, this is the orders we're given.
Good soldiers follow orders.
Well, it's funny because the mantra of good soldiers follow orders is so differently personified between TCW and this. And I especially want to talk 66 because obviously Order 66 mechanics are drastically different between TCW and the EU. And in the EU, Order 66 is just one out of over 100 set of contingency orders. Hey, the government tells you to do this. Go do it. And it's very concise, where it's very it comes across almost kind of like an opera type situation a little bit.
Yeah,
And
actually, Order 65 is considered the Operation Valkyrie because Order 65 basically says, oh, the Chancellor is considered a threat to the Republic and needs to be either executed or arrested.
Yeah,
So
that's true. So yeah, I don't know what Order 66 would be compared to then at that point. Like maybe probably I don't know, probably one of I don't know, maybe one of the special orders, something comparable to Knight of the Law, probably
oh
by the
god,
SS,
oh
but
yeah,
probably. But it's a case of saying that like the clones in that light is very much like we are given these set of orders by the government and the head of the government, which is the chancellor. This is the task we're undertaking. We may not like that we're about to do this, but that is what we were created to do. And that contrasts a lot from, so the mantra of good soldiers follow orders is like, it's kind of like the difference of, by contrast, TCW does the whole inhibitor chip bioimplant thing, where it's like it basically triggers like a sleeper agent, kind of comparable to like, I would say kind of like the Winter Soldier a little bit. And
yeah, that
I
makes a
think
lot of
it
sense
reflects
actually.
well I think it reflects well because it's the difference of for TCW, the good soldiers follow mantra is it's very much like artificial programming code, while for for the EU, good soldiers follow orders comes across as a genuine clones have. Like
Yeah,
it's genuinely like we were bred and created for this purpose, and that is what we need to do. If we betray that purpose, we betray the reason why we are here, why we exist, what we are meant for. And I think it ties very well with kind of almost the way they shift a lot within the Imperial half of the campaign, but
oh god.
getting a little ahead of myself there.
So
But
yeah, so
yeah,
you
into
are
the gameplay now.
you are actively participating in Order 66, and you are fighting. You're not just fighting Temple Guard soldiers that are not actually Jedi. You are actually fighting actual Jedi. They drop from the ceiling, and your job is to literally shoot them with your little pew pew rifle. I'm sorry, but lightsabers could do a bunch of things, and including deflecting pew pew fire. So your first objective, ironically, is to capture the Jedi Council chamber, but because of limitations with technology, they decided to make it like just up a flight of stairs and into a little room.
Yeah, it's not like a large tower room with an elevator. Like, yeah, so it's kind of like it's a lot like it's a lot like the other mission I compared it to. I'm trying to remember which one it was that I mentioned it for. Um, oh, course, the other Coruscant level,
Oh,
ironic,
oh,
invisible hand.
oh yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
you have to just kind of accept it, where it's like you got to think about it like, okay, gameplay limitations make it when canonically you can just say, you know,
Yeah.
elevator and shit. But
And then we get to the most infamous part of this entire level, and the one that gives me so much PTSD. I literally cannot like. I have. This is the only level that I have never
I gotta
finished.
do it. I gotta
Oh,
do it.
oh god.
Defend the library.
Oh god. And
Protect the library
oh my
books.
god. You literally have to protect the library books for 2 minutes while Jedi are running around trying to destroy it. And as I said, all you have is this little pew pew rifle. And let's not forget, you die
You have to
in.
time your shots. You really have to time your shots because essentially what you have to do, which is so scary, is like you have to essentially fire right as the Jedi is like starting the attack animation because that's when their guard is lowered. So it's like quickly shoot
Yeah.
them dead. And the good news is you can do it because even though the Jedi characters in Nightfall, like the NPCs, are they're kind of like scaled down heroes where it's like they have all the same abilities and the same dangers with the lightsaber, but they don't have a lot of health. Like it doesn't take a whole lot to gun them down. So you have that as an advantage, but it's like you have to really carefully time your shots. And the library section is it's a pain in the ass. And believe me, Dead Ponic can get into whole detail of
Oh
how much of a
boy.
pain it is. But what's interesting about it is it's almost unexpected because you would almost think, okay, we're kind of the bad guys now.
Oh god, the reference.
Yet our objective is ironically to, in a twisted way, preserve Jedi history.
Hans, are we the bad guys?
Shoot. Well,
Yeah,
it's a reflection of the sadness of kind of what these clones are because of the way they were trained and indoctrinated. Where, like, it's kind of the idea of the tragedy of their characters. Like, tragedy of TCW clones is that their free will is stripped from them. The tragedy of the EU clones is essentially the idea of they have been doing the same thing their entire lives through following their orders from their government and all that, that essentially because the government shifts into, Palpatine's little dictatorial state, it's essentially the mantra that they essentially become the bad guys without really realizing that they are. It's kind of like, wait a minute, uh, like they don't really have the ability to say, wait a minute, is this really like, are we the bad guys now? Like for them, it's just they're doing the same thing they've always been doing. So it's
yeah.
just kind of like,
So, assuming
damn.
like my personal history with this level, this is the one level that I have never completed 100%. I have actually had to resort to cheats to get past it. It gives me so much pain and misery. Assuming you can actually survive this level, you get the hero of the level, which is Nightfall Anakin, ironically dressed in his hood and cape, and this is the only time you have.
Sadly, you don't get to kill no younglings, but
Oh
you
god.
do get to kill a couple of Jedi masters
Masters.
that are running around.
Yeah, and
And
it's
and then oh, go ahead, sorry.
it's very like this is the only other character as far as the game goes where there's a costume change. The other one is Luke in the instant action between Hoth and the other maps.
And it's
Because
quite funny because it's only for this campaign level. It never
yeah,
comes up again.
it
Ever. Like not even in the multiplayer. Like you would almost think in theory, like say you were playing on Coruscant, you would almost think either for the Republic or for the Empire, you would at least think they would make because funny thing to point out is on Mustafar, even in the Galactic Civil War, they let you play as Anakin, even though it's
yeah.
Stormtroopers versus Rebels, which is so
Yeah.
puzzling, but
Yeah, it's a weird decision.
it's like they do it for that, but they don't do it for Coruscant. So it's just, yeah, I don't know. It's a
It's
weird.
a strange thing. But the
Yeah.
haunting music here, and assuming that you survived the level, congratulations, you've just beaten the hardest level in the game. Well, to come as far as this
Well,
side.
at least within the Clone Wars segment,
Yeah.
at least within the
And
Clone Wars segment. But
basically the narrator kind of the haunting music, the music itself is brilliant, and also the narrator
a
basically
very Emperor Palpatine-esque music because it's saying like, oh yes, Palpatine's won. He's in total control now, and you know, and the narrator even confesses that like after we eliminated Jedi, Palpatine to power is complete. In recognition of our service and loyalty to the Emperor, he has placed us under the direct command of Vader, armed with assigned
shine
to brand new ships.
shiny new armor and brand new weapons. We become a force of peace in the galaxy, and we were
Our Yeah, it was like our presence had let the galaxy know that the days of the Republic was well and truly. We are establishing a new order, an order,
of peace
an
and
order,
prosperity.
yeah, an order of, yeah, peace and prosperity. I think something.
And the 501st was officially reassigned as Vader's Fist, which is now what the official battalion under Vader is directly called. And so yeah, that's the end. That's
Oh, and
the
it shows that last shot of the Death Star, which is kind of
oh yeah
it's a nice haunting remark. Like yeah, this is what the Empire is going to eventually become. You're literally going to be part of all these atrocities. Like your character is literally like again, it's the mantra of these clones have become the bad guy without in a twisted fashion without really realizing they have because they just don't have that traditional sense of morality. They just don't. It's like, look, if the state says it's okay for us to do it, it's okay for us to do it. The
yeah
end. Like, and
yeah
it's a sad reality, but it's indicative of to me it kind of reminds me of the tragedy when you like say like the Hitler Youth. where it was
Oh,
like they were so young and so indoctrinated into that state that it's like they never really fully comprehended, wait, this isn't really right.
again, Hans, are we the bad guys kind of thing? And that
Yeah, pretty
and
much.
now and it transitions into the Empire section of the campaign. But overall, uh it is a very
Yeah,
overall I
so final, we got to get to the final verdict now
yeah,
with
so
this. So
so the first half of this campaign is very well put together. It's very some of the missions are very well paced. There's a lot of variety. Granted, there are some objectives that are very difficult, particularly Utapau and Nightfall. I would say those two specifically are the hardest missions in the Republic campaign, but it is a very well put together uh, campaign. It is, and if it's very easy to follow where the final first battalion is over the course of the war and where we are actually in the war.
yeah, it does a very good job building to that, and it does lead to a lot of its marketing promise where it's like, hey, you want to play out the events of Vengeance? Here you go. You get to be on these fun planets and essentially operate as Palpatine's personal hit squad, which
Yeah.
we make this joke in the context of the Palpatine personal hit squad. It's somewhat of a joke in the Clone Wars campaign, but in the Empire campaign, it is quite literal
Oh
in
yeah.
every sense of the word. So,
Yeah,
but
because
that'll be left for part two. But
and because you are technically under the command of Vader, and Vader is technically, I guess he's the martial enforcer. So there's that to
he's like
consider.
he's in a weird. He's like yeah, Vader's kind of a weird position because it's kind of like on one hand he is in a way the second in command of the Empire, but because it's kind of the issue of he is second in command, but only in the principle. The only person I really answer to is the Emperor himself.
Yeah.
But it's a case of if Palpatine ever died, Vader's not really the type of person you would want taking over the Empire,
No.
just because he doesn't really have a lot of political skills. So, but that's here or there. But overall, I would definitely say the Clone Wars campaign, very consistently good. Utapau's probably my least favorite level, but outside of that, every single mission ranges from pretty dang good to excellent, and it does a good job of gradually building up its difficulty. It's not, I will say that it's not, there's very few points where it comes across like the game is trying to bullshit you, which I can't really say is going to be fully true of part two
No,
of
it's
the
not.
Imperial half. So, but we'll get to that. But overall, what it does with its story, with telling essentially the story of regular foot soldier clones from the start of Geonosis all the way to Order 66 is compelling, it is gripping, and even though it's simplistic in its nature because ultimately think of a single player campaign, most people think of like big budget like Call of Duty campaigns, or it's not trying to be that.
No.
Like it does understand that the campaign is mostly a supplement, but it does just enough to make sure that what it does is a unique experience from the rest of the game. And that's a compliment I gotta give. I gotta give credit to Tamara Morrison with his clones. And there's actually a nice headcanon that someone came up with that technically, since all the clones have the same voice, theoretically, every cutscene with the narrator could theoretically be a different narrator
Hmm.
in theory. But
That's an interesting idea, and I'm not gonna jump ahead to the end, but I
I,
will.
I've even heard someone made a fun headcanon theory thinking that the narrator from the Clone Wars campaign could very much be like this is more just headcanon theory. It's not like officially confirmed. But I even heard a fun headcanon theory that the clone narrator from Geonosis to Nightfall could theoretically be Commander Appa.
that's a strong possibility. And there's also, I believe there's a strong possibility jumping ahead to the actual end of the game where, because there's no mission on Endor, it's implied very strongly that either this clone narrator died or was not involved in the Battle of Endor, which kind of is an inconsistency because Palpatine says,
It's a weird predicament, but we'll cover it more thoroughly in part two.
anyway,
Um,
anyway,
but yeah, ladies and gentlemen, this pretty much concludes our retrospective part one of of the original Battlefront 2, Rise of the Empire campaign, and pretty much this concludes the Clone Wars segment of it. So part two is actually going to be, so right now we pretty much made an agreement on this. Part one is going to be on Debponic's channel, and then part two is actually going to go on my channel. And essentially what we'll do is when part two comes out, Debponic will probably make either a community post or a short video announcing it. And from there, it'll be directed to mine. And part two will pretty much go over the Imperial section of the campaign, which is from Naboo to Hoth.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Anyway, thank you.
so stay tuned to that. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming by to watch. It was an absolute pleasure to be here.
We'll see you in part two. Same bat time, same bat channel.